I keep on meaning to shave, and I keep on forgetting. Yeah, well, who cares, right? After the pageant, when the fellow was well enough to leave the hospital, Tilly had reported the most fantastic tales of something going on between that crazy Welshman and Persephone. This he had never believed, but he had thought he understood the cause of the report, knowing only too well his cousin's passion for the bizarre and the exotic. Philip stretched out his right arm now as he lay on his left side and seized in the dark the cold rosewood bedpost at his pillow's head. Out of the dream dimension which surrounds our visible world, the wraith of his devout grandmother struggled frantically to give him a warning. To be able to see his small, frantically... I keep on doing that. To be able to see his small, neat, well-molded head for these insubstantial tenants of the etheric envelope of our material plane find physical darkness no hindrance. Lying on the pillow and not to be able to attract his attention was an atrocious tantalization to this proud spirit from beyond our palpable dream world. Okay, I got this. The occasion was indeed only too characteristic of what the first cause, in its malicious moods, delights to evoke. For while Philip, in a spasm of savage yearning for the slender waist of his cousin, gripped angularly that smooth bar of wood, the wraith of the only woman who had ever passionately loved him wrestled frantically with the laws of the universe to give him a sign, a token, a warning that he was putting not a blind hand upon a bedpost, but a blind foot upon a road that led to desperation and madness. Perse, oh Perse, where are you? Come back to me, Perse. But Persephone, in a little cheap bedroom she had taken at Dickory Cantle, dilapidated place, was even then, with her flushed cheek resting on her thin arm and her dusky boyish curls making a nimbus of darkness within the darkness, dreaming peacefully of Angela's devotion as they wandered together beneath the ruined carvings, so delicately foliated, so tenderly molded by long-buried fingers in St. Mary's Chapel. Into that nary Bayeux tapestry skull, while... Stop thinking that, cries the old ghost wraith. More and more desperately come scattered memories now of little inn rooms in Taunton, in Exeter, in Bath, in Bristol, in Dorchester, in Tewkesbury. A curtain from that room, a flapping blind from his, a bedpost from that, a coloured print from this, a cockcrow full of 1,000 misty Wessex dawns, a dog's barking, the rattle of early milk cans. And mingled with all these things, those slender hips and the waist like that torso. What the devil was it called? That she had brought back to show him when she went to Italy. To lie awake wanting, with so little hope. To turn over to the right now. But it's too late now, Philip, my grandson. You should have done that at once. To turn on your back now, kicking the stone bottle viciously aside, and stretching out so stiff and so straight, till the soles of your feet press against the woodwork. To snuff up nothing but the smell of brown Windsor soap, an eider-down coverlet, and the faint odor of a dog's dung from your muddy boots, in place of that maddening fragrance that always made you think of the sun-baked apricots in Cannon Crow's walled garden, the sweetness of those bare, sunburst shoulders. Was all this the result of that autumn feeling which you had encountered as you went to your interview with Zoyland and Wookie Hole? I could bear it, he thought. I could bear it if only her hips weren't just like they are. Yes. And if only her curls didn't curl so tight against the back of her neck. It's those curls and those hips together that torment me so. He went to sleep at last, just about 3 o'clock. And while Emma was dreaming that she was helping old Sly on the Mendips to shear a great black-faced ewe with a face like the face of her mistress, and Tilly was dreaming that the new silk lining of her ottoman had dyed itself, without the help of her husband's dye works, into an incredible shell pink. The master of the elms dreamed that the mayor of Glastonbury brought him a vast basin made of glittering tin, and held it before him and cried, "Vomit!" And he dreamed that although he retched and retched, he could not bring up anything except a little white saliva. But behold! Mr. Gurd himself spat into that huge cauldron. And it came to pass that out of the mingling of their spittle, there was created in the center of that glittering vessel of shining tin a little homuncula, a little dazzling girl-child. And Philip found himself hoping frantically that the face of that homuncula would be Percy's face. But when the dazzlingness of the little creature lessened, or when his eyes could bear its brightness better, the features disclosed to him were such as he had never seen before. When Mr. Gurd lifted up the cauldron to the full stretch of his arms and cried out with a thundering cry, "Who is the tin merchants now?" And when as Philip looked up at the vessel of the man's hands, behold, the bottom of it became ruddy of blood. And even as he gazed, drops of blood fell from it upon the ground, and the ground was dyed purple. And he murmured in his dream, "The lost dye, the lost purple dye." And he fell on his knees beneath the vessel, and he made his hands into a cup, and he thought in his heart, "When he has gone I shall take this to my dye works, and it will go over all the world, and it will be called the Glastonbury Purple." It was with his head full of the image of the dye that he finally sank into a dreamless sleep. And when he awoke, long after the birds of his garden had greeted the dawn, of all his dreaming it was only the dye he remembered. Gurd, the shining vessel, the girl-child with the unknown features. All these he had completely forgotten. And the slim voice of Persephone Spear had also receded into the fair background of his mind. Well, that's the end of that chapter. Chapter 10. T-I-N. Chapter 10. Now we're on the next chapter, which is Wind and Rain. "We will have a grand opening, Crow," said Mr. Gurd to his faithful John as they sat talking after supper in the old faded parlor of the Gurd home. Not a thing had been done to improve this grotesque room since those times when, as Philip had assured the assembly family after his grandfather's will had been read, Gurd had been a nuisance to everyone, with his two sprawling daughters, his preaching, and his poverty. It was the 1st of October, and a spell of wild, stormy weather had set in. As John sat on the sofa by Mrs. Gurd's side, for both the girls were out that evening, and watched his employer rubbing his big white hands and nodding his big white face over a warm fire of mixed coal and wood, the rain was streaming down the panes, and every now and then the two gas flames hanging from the ceiling were caught in a draught of wind, for Mrs. Gurd cared more for air than for the protection of curtains, and were blown sideways in spite of their glass globes in sinister tongues of blue flame, producing a startling flickering effect all over the room. "We'll have more than that, sir," responded John, "if you and I are still alive." Round that faded old room, in that faded old petit bourgeois house, the October wind seemed to howl as if it had been sent from Stonehenge to hunt for Mr. Gurd and was rejoicing at having found him. "Hunt out this false druid," the gods of that altar stone must have said, "and put our terror into him." There came into Mrs. Gurd's thin, long face, with its mobile eyebrows and queer, troubled, flickering smile, a very curious expression as she looked up from her knitting. A rise of Pembrokeshire, as she was, there was something in a night like this that appealed to a deep-buried instinct in her, and in some odd way she relished the spectacle of all her old domestic objects cowering under the storm. Funny old thing they were, Mrs. Gerald's possessions, the woolen antimascaras, the sickly yellow pears and blue grapes under a big glass covering, with red plush round its base, the staring pictures of her father, the Plymouth Brother, with whiskers like a sailor and a mouth like a letterbox closed for Sunday, the old worn ash-colored carpet, the black bear rug with the broad red flannel edgings and more mousy gray skin than black hair left to view, and all the ancient stained, blotched, greasy cushions that always were to be and never had been recovered, and the rickety little tables with glaring tablecloths, and so many brackets with green and red tassels hanging from photographs frames containing groups of girds and rises, the former a good deal less pompous looking, but hardly less stiff and uncomfortable in their photographers' parlors. All these things made up a sort of dusty, cushionary assemble, like the huge nest of some kind of stuffed bird now extinct. And Mrs. Gerrards derived such a queer, sensual pleasure as she listened to the wind howling round the room, just as if its ceiling were the roof of the whole house, and its walls the walls of the whole house. She had the feeling that this whole worn, cushiony, greasy, human-smelling place were being carried along through the vast space of rainy night air. She put down her knitting, left John's side, bade him, "Please remain seated, Mr. Crow," and going to the window opened it yet a little more at the top so that the gas flames grew still more agitated and the red curtains bulged into still fuller convexities. "Always the one for fresh air is my good wife," said Bloody Johnny contentedly, as he watched this move of his ladies, and then returned with a zest in his conversation with John. But Mrs. Gerard, as she took up her knitting again, thick gray socks for a man's winter wear, felt a further increase of voluptuousness, satisfaction, as the draught from the window fumbled about with its blind, gusty fingers through that comfortable room. Perhaps her princely South Wales ancestors had felt something of the same feeling when the arras bulged out from their chilly walls and the smoke blew into the hall from their blackened fireplaces. In good spirits that night was the mayoress of Glastonbury, for her eldest daughter had told her, when she and Crummy were putting up their waterproofs and galoshes to go out to Lawyer Beer's party, that Mr. Evans had asked to have their bonds read out next Sunday at St. Benignus Church. So the flickering smile on her woman's face kept returning as she knitted, and her eyebrows kept wrinkling up and wrinkling down, as they did when she was listening to Mr. Sodbury's sermons, Dr. Sodbury's sermons. If at this moment, on her high spirits, she had done exactly what she would have liked to do, she would have put on her old weather-worn cloak, covered her head in her black shawl, snuffed up the whole cozy essence of the adored parlor of hers with one rapturous sniff, and set out to call for her two children, doing it just as if she had been a nurse, come to take her little charges home from a children's dance. Well, that'll be it for tonight in Glastonbury. I'll see you on the other side. Cheers.